welcome to another episode of Thinking Like a Bank, where we show you how to think like a bank by applying the same strategies and principles that banks use to help you find more financial freedom in your life. I'm your host, Sari Ibrahim. On today's episode, I'm interviewing Bob DePasquale. Bob has dedicated his life to teaching others about the virtues and health benefits of generosity, promoting the giving mindset, and making the world a better place. Bob, known as the Generosity Guy, has worked professionally and in volunteer roles for 23 years in 3 different countries and 17 states. When Bob was given a cancer diagnosis and experienced the tragic events of 9/11, he thought not only is his life over, but everyone else's too. He went from feeling like an invincible 18-year-old to an unworthy victim of life. Bob's story is unique, but his perspective resonates with anyone who wants to enjoy life and give back to others. Bob, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited.
I'm excited to interview you and get to know you. I'm looking at your LinkedIn and your other online platforms. I think there's a lot of amazing things you're doing right now. Before we get into that, I want to know more about you and your background.
Sure. I am a almost lifelong Floridian down here in Fort Lauderdale, if anyone's familiar with the geography of one of the most warm and tropical states in the United States here. But I was actually born in New York. And so my upbringing started for the first 3 years of my life up there. And my parents were kind of the crazy ones. They actually followed my grandparents down to Florida. My grandparents retired to Florida like a lot of people from the Northeast do. And my parents followed them down here, and I grew up. I mean, it was a small town when it wasn't even a city, actually, west of Fort Lauderdale when we first moved down here. And but it's grown and exploded over the past 30 years or so, and I still live in the same town that I grew up in. So that's my upbringing. I was an only child, a spoiled brat, as you might say. I always say that I think my parents gave up after me. They said, you know what, one is enough. That's plenty of kids for us, and we'll go from there. So yeah, but I had a great childhood. I really enjoyed my time, and I had quite an experience growing up here in South Florida.
Awesome. I know you talk a lot about generosity. What's kind of the mission behind that? That seems to kind of be part of your brand. So can you break that down and tell us, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I talk about radical generosity a lot because it really changed my life. It actually saved my life. And I can explain that to you in just a moment here. But generosity specifically is something that I think I know this is scientific. It's natural in humans to be compassionate. One of the examples I like to use, and I've read about in the past, is how there's a reason why in most cultures we spend 18 years rearing our children. That's one of the longest out of any mammal and animal in the animal kingdom. We spend 18 years protecting our young before we send them off to college, and because we really care about people who may not be able to fend for themselves. And think about think of all the charitable organizations in the world, and think about the feelings you get when you see someone in need or you see someone that's struggling. It's just natural for us humans to care and want to be generous and share with others. Unfortunately, though, I think today's world moves so fast, and there's so much technology and ways to take in information. I mean, we don't really have to search very far to get information anymore, right? We can, it's right at our fingertips on our phone. And a lot of it, though, tells us that we need more. We need another self-help book. We need another podcast to listen to. No offense to anyone listening to a podcast. I'm an avid podcaster myself, but I just think less is more at a certain point. And if we have an abundance mentality, we're much more likely to be generous and help each other. So I mentioned I grew up in South Florida. So if you want to hear kind of the origins of how generosity has changed my life, I would be more than happy to share. But
yeah, please.
When I was 18, I went up to college back to New York, where most of my family is from. There's a school up there called Hofstra University. It's not too far from New York City on Long Island. And I was an 18-year-old. Now, I don't know about you, Sari, but when I was 18, I thought I was invincible. I thought nothing could take me down. And if you're listening out there and you're under 18, maybe this story might mean even more to you. But if you're over 18, you probably remember those times where you thought you were a kid and younger and you had your whole life in front of you. Well, I went up to college, and I was there about a month early because I was in training camp playing football. And I thought I had to prove myself to my coaches and my teammates. And so, but in the first couple of days of practice up there, I had what I thought was a pulled groin muscle. Now, this was my first signal that I'm not invincible. If you've ever pulled a groin muscle before, it's one of the most painful, debilitating injuries. And I don't think we realize how much we use that muscle. It's really hard to sit. It's hard to stand up, turn around, twist. Even laying in bed and rolling over was challenging. And so I was in a lot of pain, but I was trying to stick it out because, like I said, I needed to prove myself. Well, I would do these exercises as part of my rehab, and I would sit on a three-wheeled stool and I would shimmy across the training room. And I guess it was to strengthen the muscles in my hips or my groin or whatever. And it was so busy during before a training camp practice at like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning in a college environment, right? So it's more complicated than high school. There's all kinds of doctors and people walking around. And it was part of the exercise just to dodge people, essentially. And almost a week went by and I was not getting any better. I wasn't feeling any better. The muscles weren't getting strengthened. Whatever was supposed to happen from this exercise was not helping. And our head trainer, at one point, he was a small guy, maybe 5'8", 140 pounds, soaking wet. And he would stand on this box, like in the middle of the training room to get everyone's attention if he needed to, which was rare. But at one point, he stood up on this box, and to me, it felt like it was dead silent. Maybe it's because he was calling me out, but he cupped his hands and he was like, "Bobby," they called me Bobby back then, "you got to get back out on the field, quit being a weakling." And I was like, a weakling? Like, I felt like such a loser. Like, the head trainer is calling me out in front of my coaches and the other doctors and trainers and teammates. Felt like such a loser. But I ended up talking to him a little bit later in the day. I said, "Listen, Rick, man, I'm not getting any better. Like, there's something wrong here." So he ended up sending me to a doctor. And I went to this doctor, and over the next week, I had a series of tests. I had MRIs, CAT scans, sonograms, ultrasounds, every test in the book, you name it, to see what was going on with me. And they couldn't really find anything out. But these appointments were so long, and I was an 18-year-old, still a kid, technically an adult, but still a kid, by myself, driving around Long Island, New York, going to all these doctor's appointments, filling out all this medical paperwork. I didn't even know what medical insurance was at the time. And these appointments would take forever because I had to go in, I had to fill out the paperwork, then I had to get prepped for the exam. Some cases I would need an IV. I had to drink this barium paste fluid stuff. I mean, it was just a horrible experience. But I knew I had to do it to figure out what was going on, because my thought in my mind was, I'm going to get back out onto the field and prove myself and play ball. Well, my last doctor's appointment that I had scheduled was actually on the day that my parents were supposed to come up to see my first college game. Now, the game would have been 2 days later, and we knew I wasn't playing in the game at this point because my injury wasn't getting any better, but they were still going to come up because I hadn't seen them in a month. I hadn't been away from home that long. Remember, I'm an only child, mama's boy. This is the longest I had ever been away from home. So I go to this appointment, and I'm expecting to be there for like 3 hours as usual. It was part of the routine at this point. But I went in, and no sooner did I get into the reception area there, they called me right back into the office. I come and sit down at a desk there in the office, and the doctor comes walking in maybe a minute later. And he sits down at the desk, and he's super intentional, looks me in the face and says, "Bobby, you have cancer."
Oh my God.
And I was like, "I have cancer? I thought I had a groin pull. Like, what's going on here? I'm invincible. This is not supposed to happen to me."
Right.
My jaw hit the desk. I was blown away. I could not understand. It didn't even register with me. And the only other thing he said to me is, "We're going to hook you up with an oncologist. You're free to go." And I thought to myself, I don't even know what an oncologist is. Like, What do you mean? And I ended up walking out of the office, and it was like divine timing.
Yeah.
As soon as I got out of the building, the moment I walked out, my phone rings. And it was my mom. And she says, "Hey, I thought you'd still be in the appointment, but I wanted to let you know I was going to leave a voicemail to tell you that we landed and we're on our way to your uncle's house. We'll meet you there." So that we were all going to meet at my uncle's house. And she goes, "But since I got you, how'd the appointment go?" And I said, "So, Mom, about that appointment." And I mean, I had to tell her what the doctor said. And I told her, and it was like dead silent on the other end of the phone, but she was like screaming all at the same time. Like, it was the most eerie couple seconds of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing I can remember hearing was my dad on the other end screaming, "Susan, Susan." It's my mom's name. what's going on? Like, he knew something was wrong too. He could just tell, like, by her reaction, I guess. So we all got back to my uncle's house. And remember, I hadn't seen my parents in a month. So I gave him a big hug, and, we shed some tears and said some prayers. And we're just kind of like, what do we even do? Like, what's going on here? So a couple days go by. It's now the day of the game. And like I said, I wasn't playing in the game. I was just at my uncle's house. And my uncle's best friend comes over his house. Now, we've never met this guy because we live in Florida. He's in New York. And the guy walks into the room there and he introduces himself. And my uncle is like, yeah, hey, this is my friend Tim. And Tim walks over to my parents and he pulls his keys out of his pocket and hands them to my parents, like reaches over and hands them to my parents. And he's like, Bob and Susan, I can't imagine what's going on with you right now. Take my car for as long as you could possibly need it, for anything you need to help with what's going on with your son right now. And my parents were just flabbergasted. They're like, they couldn't believe they didn't even grab his keys. They didn't even believe what he was doing. And I thought to myself, wow, that's the most generous thing someone's ever done for me and my family. And that was it. He said goodbye to my aunt and uncle, to us, and he left. He was at the house for maybe 15 minutes. He came over just to give us his car, and he left. And we didn't even know us, didn't even know who we were. So I mentioned I would get hooked up with an oncologist, and my oncologist told me, you can't drop all your classes. If you're going to stay in New York to get treated for your cancer, you have to have something to do. So I didn't drop any of my classes. So the next week came, and I went to my first college class on Monday. Everything was normal. Drove around in Tim's car to some doctor's appointments. The Tuesday, that next Tuesday was my second ever college class. And I came out of the class and I wanted to get something to eat. So I went to the cafeteria.
Yeah.
Now picture me in the cafeteria. I'm sitting there eating a breakfast burrito.
Yeah.
And there's one of those old school tube televisions, like 8 inches wide. And it's hanging on a bracket, like in between the ceiling and the wall. You know what I mean? Like in a public place.
Yeah, I'm old
So
enough to remember. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm watching the news, and I don't know the news station. I'm up in New York. First of all, I don't even watch the news. Second of all, I wouldn't even know what station it would be on because I've never, I don't live up here.
Yeah.
I didn't live up there at the time. But I'm looking at the news, and all of a sudden a plane crashes into to a tower in New York City. And I'm like, oh man, what a horrible accident. So I called my dad and I said, hey Dad, are you watching the news? And he's like, yeah, I'm sitting on the couch here in the living room at your uncle's house and I'm watching it. That's crazy. And we're talking for maybe a minute, and all of a sudden another plane hits the other tower. And there was the Twin Towers in Manhattan.
Yeah.
And we didn't know it at the moment, but that was the September 11th terrorist attacks.
Yeah. Wow.
And my dad's like, well, wait a minute. This is not an accident anymore. You better get back to your uncle's house. So, man, I hightailed it out of that cafeteria. That breakfast burrito is probably still sitting there on the counter. I jumped in the car. And now, the future part of my story is I ended up getting a master's degree in broadcast journalism from the University of Miami. And I worked in radio for a couple of years. But that day, little did I know I would end up working in radio, but I listened to 9 straight hours of AM radio on the way from my school back to my uncle's house. But the kicker is that drive is only supposed to take 15 minutes. But because of the September 11th terrorist attacks and the highways people were just driving, trying to get out of the city in panic, it took me 9 hours, and I'm watching burning towers in the distance and then listening to all of the coverage on AM radio. It took me 9 hours to get to my uncle's neighborhood. And then I ran out of gas in his neighborhood. Now, thankfully, I didn't run out of gas on the highway. I don't know what would have happened if that was the case. But we ended up pushing my car the rest of the way into his driveway. And it was me, my mom, my dad, and my aunt were all standing there, like hysterical, like not knowing what to do. Like, it was just a moment ago, or just a couple of days ago, I was this invincible kid who thought I was going to, change the world or something. And my life was being threatened. And I was like, that's bad enough. Now, all of a sudden, I feel like the world's coming to an end. I mean, people in New York were panicking at this time. And my aunt was especially panicked because my uncle had not come home, and he was supposed to fly home that morning. He was on business the night before, but in Denver. Now, we didn't know at the time where those planes had come from, but finally at maybe 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, he called and he said, "Hey guys, I'm really, really sorry, but the phones have been out. I'm okay. I'm alive. I know what happened, but I'm stuck in Denver. I haven't been able to get home." And we were so relieved. We were like, "Oh, thank God you're fine." We're going to hang up the phone and just, figure out what to do. But he said, "Hey, but before you let me go, I want to tell you guys that my friend Tim that you guys met on Saturday, he was in the towers this morning and he died."
Oh my God.
And we were like,
Wow.
"Wait a minute. This guy who just gave us his car, he doesn't deserve to die in these attacks. I mean, that's terrible." Well, it turns out that Tim worked for an investment firm, an investment banking firm known as Cantor Fitzgerald. If anyone wants to look it up, if you're listening out there, you may have seen the video of their CEO at the time, Howard Lutnick, who was actually not in the office that morning, uncharacteristically. I think he was taking his kid to school for some reason. He doesn't normally do that. He was actually caught on the street outside, and he ran away and survived. And it's such an emotional press conference. But Howard and all of the people, including Tim, my uncle's best friend at Cantor Fitzgerald, were known for being very, very generous people. It was a generous organization. So much so that they donated office space to my uncle's foundation. My uncle has a foundation for cystic fibrosis. It's a disease my cousin has. And so Cantor Fitzgerald donated to them. And they did all kinds of other things over the years to be generous. And the only lady that would typically be in the office for the foundation that early was not. She got caught in the subway. Her name is Tammy, and the stories that she can tell about being caught in the subway below the towers that day are amazing. But it just makes you think, man, like, Tammy, what a great lady she is, and thankfully she was spared. But no one except for Howard Lutnick, hundreds, thousands of people, I don't remember the final count, from Cantor Fitzgerald, including Tim, lost their life that morning, and they didn't deserve to.
Yeah.
They just didn't. And Tim was known for saying the one thing, and this is the kicker to the whole story.
Mhm.
Tim was known for saying, a lot of people talk about FOMO these days, fear of missing out, or YOLO, you only live once, like, go jump off a building or skydive or, base jump, whatever. Well, Tim would say something a little bit different. He would say, you never know when the last opportunity you have is to be generous to someone. And it turns out that Tim's last opportunity to really be radically generous was to me and my family.
Wow.
And so that's why generosity has been such an important part of my life since I was 18.
Thanks for sharing that. It's a very deep story. And I think that obviously the core of that is generosity, but also I think what I also got from that, and correct me if I'm wrong, is resilience, right? I think that these two big events that happened in your life made you more resilient, and probably are the reason where you are today, like the reason for being there. Is that true? Did you also feel resilience or experience resilience from these stories?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, because the answer is yes, but immediately no. And so I felt that and I'm sure you business owners and people out there who've experienced this before, you trouble, whether it's health issues like I dealt with, or terrorism, or it's struggles in your business. And believe me, I'm a business owner myself. I felt this before. I think sometimes in the moment you can feel helpless. And especially if things have been going really well. And like I said, within a 5-day period, I went from on top of the world, invincible 18-year-old, going off to play college football and spend more time with family that I didn't know and get my education. I'm sure my parents hoped the education part was high on the list. maybe not so much. But the point is, things were going so well. I was at the mountaintop of the pinnacle, at least what I thought, of life. And then all of a sudden you're in the gutter.
Yeah.
You're in the valley, and it's tough. And so you have to understand your situations, or your situation that you're in. And I didn't realize it at the moment, but it really, really felt like the world was coming to an end. So I wasn't resilient right away. It took me probably a couple of years to really understand all of what I actually went through and who was in place to help me, because, you can't do it alone. That's a key thing that I've learned over the years. And so resilience is an important lesson, but you can't expect to learn that lesson right away. Sometimes it takes a lot longer than you might think.
Yeah, definitely. And me being a business owner myself, I definitely I felt that, I felt helpless. I felt like things aren't working out. I actually felt like things will never work out in some situations. How do
Mhm.
you help? How do you help business owners?
Well, one of the primary things that we do for business owners is we help them cast a vision for what's most important. Now, I work in the financial space, so we're not advertising ourselves as business coaches per se, but we get into these conversations a lot because helping people make financial decisions related to their business is a critical part. But if you don't have a vision for what you're trying to do, then you don't know. And when I was 18, I just wanted to be I just wanted to live my life in the moment and enjoy all the good things about being an 18-year-old college football player, all those type of things. I didn't have a vision for the rest of my life. And so that was part of the lesson. So I always relate my experiences like that to being a business owner. So when I started my business for about almost 3 years ago now, one of the critical things that we worked on, me and my business partner, was casting a vision for what we want to accomplish, not how much money we want to make, or not how many customers we're going to have, or what our average tickets, like all those metrics that are really important to running a business.
Yeah, yeah,
But we wanted to know why we're in business and what it looks like. So I would always encourage, especially a new, I don't want to say young, I don't mean young in age, I mean young
yeah,
in business,
yeah.
a new business person, to focus on that early on. It's worth spending the time on, because then I think those hurdles and those valleys and those tough times that you get to are much easier to tackle when you have an idea and a vision for what you're trying to accomplish, because that these valleys and these things, the challenges, are part of the journey. And if you don't go through those, you're never going to grow, and you're never going to find you're never going to find the people and the connections and the lessons that you need to ultimately reach the vision that you cast.
Yeah, definitely. I like to look at vision as like the foundation, right? Like imagine you're building a house, like your vision is like the foundation, and then everything else you add on top, the bricks, the wood, everything, that's all like the metrics, the advertising, the brand, the logo, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The vision is really what holds you up and what keeps you in business, right?
100%. That's a great metaphor. The metaphor that I like to use is I think a vision is the ultimate filter and decision maker for you.
Yeah,
So it's a foundation, like you said, because it holds you up. It supports everything that you're doing. Otherwise, why would you do those things,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So your metaphor is tremendous. And the way that I apply the filter is in the good and bad situations, it enables you to make decisions, because you don't want to make decisions based on different things in different scenarios. So you always want the same things to be your filter, whether things are going really well or things are going really bad. And one of the critical mistakes that I see a lot of business owners make. Now, the good news is these mistakes are not fatal.
yeah,
They're
yeah.
they're critical in the moment, but they can be overcome. Is that you make decisions with a different filter based on the scenario, right? And in my opinion, and in my experience dealing with thousands of business owners over the years, is the ones who keep that North Star, that vision
Yeah.
focused, or have that strong foundation. They make they pass the decisions through the same filters over and over again. And the only time the filter changes is when they do their quarterly or annual audit of their business and they realize there's an additional focus. So the filter is not a completely different filter. It might morph a little bit here and there as business changes.
Got it. And I think obviously decision making is a very important part of business. It helps you manage your time. It also helps you
Mm-hmm.
manage where you're going, which is consistent with your vision. And I'm looking in the background. I see your book, Personal Finance.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so what is that book? I mean, I know it's about personal finance, but what is it more about? Because I know you've added your touch to personal finance in that book. So can you tell us more about what's in the book and then your experience writing the book?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, quickly, the title is Personal Finance in a Public World. And so it's a little bit of a play on words, because I think our personal finances have become so public these days because of
Yeah.
technology. What it really does is it tackles the myth, in my opinion, that technology is a negative force for our decision making, because there's a lot of content out there, and believe me, it can be. Technology can certainly take away from your capacity to make good decisions. It can be used for many wrong reasons, but I believe there's a way to use it for good. And so what the book does, it takes various topics of personal finance. So it could be investing, it could be budgeting, it could be borrowing, it could be buying a home. There's a chapter on cryptocurrency, insurance, which is not everyone's favorite topic,
Yeah,
but it
yeah,
takes all of those topics and then it looks at it through a lens of using technology as a positive force to help you make good decisions related to those. And I don't want to be a spoiler, but I think you'll be surprised about the ultimate conclusion that I made towards the end of the book. It ultimately is not just about the numbers.
yeah.
There's a relationship component to it that I think you might find really interesting towards the end of the book. So that's what the book is about. And you asked about writing it. I'm really glad you asked this question because it was one of the most educational experiences of my life. And I don't say that lightly because the best advice that I ever got before or kind of in the early stages of writing the book was that it's not about what you know, it's about what you want to know. In other words, your curiosity is critical for writing a good book or recording a good video or putting out any type of content these days. And there's two reasons why. Number one is I don't think most people, if people wanted to be preached to or lectured to or educated like that, I think schools wouldn't have such a bad rap, or people wouldn't have such a problem paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to school. So number one is no one wants Bob's 12 years of working in at the time when I started writing the book, I was 12 years into my financial career. No one wants me to just sit there and preach to them, write a book all about all the stuff that I know. Because to be honest with you, most of the stuff that I know, anyone could know if they wanted to go out and find the information, right? Or you wanted to spend the time to learn it. So I don't have necessarily unique information. You did mention about the unique twist that I have on it, though.
Yeah.
And that is critical because that's the second reason why the curiosity and what I wanted to know was key, because of this. When you're going through the book writing process, the amount of information that you have to take in is way broader than what you actually put in the book. The book is about 50,000 or so words, a little bit more. I wrote probably 150,000, not exaggerating.
Yeah.
And I had to curate and pare it down and make sure that it was simple, easily understandable and not too wordy. And so I interviewed 50 plus people. I read probably 10 books on my own and listened to a couple of them on Audible. I did all kinds of research. I listened to podcasts. I actually went places and did research. So all of that curiosity contributed to such an amazing experience. I learned so much in that, 9 to 10 month period of all the research that I did, probably more than I learned in my 12-year career in finance. And so the curiosity was huge. So it was a lot of work and I committed to it. It's something that you got to commit to putting the time in, because if I didn't have the curiosity, I wasn't going to put the time in. And then the 50,000 words that you got wouldn't have been very good.
Awesome. And so you help people with business owners. You help them through strategies, kind of like business coaching, not exactly business coaching, but kind of like that. And then also, do you also help? Looks like you also help families and businesses with donations and contributing to not-for-profit organizations. Did I read that right on your LinkedIn?
Yeah, you did. So one of the big, how would I say it? One of the big components of the service that my company, the name of my company is Initiate Impact. Uh-huh. And most people would say that's a strange name for a wealth management firm. And we did that intentionally. We didn't want to be Bob Financial or, or make, investment firm, you name it, whatever. We wanted to be something related to positive impact in the world, because we found that the business owners that we had worked with in our previous role, the ones that were the most fulfilled, the most successful, and attracted the best talent and most loyal customers were the ones that had a generous mindset. Now, it doesn't mean that they gave away more money than everyone else.
Yeah.
In some cases they did because they were wealthy, but it was that they were more generous with everything that they had, whether it was their time, their intellectual property, their other resources, their inventory that they had at their business. They were the type of person who wanted to use what they had to help other people. And so that's a big part when you talk about business strategy and giving. Mm-hmm. We spend a lot of time with we call them partners. If you ever hear me say the word partners, it's synonymous with clients, but because we want to partner with people in their mission. So when you sign up with us, we're agreeing that we're going to help you with your financial matters and your business matters, but we're also agreeing that we're going to help support the causes that you want to support. If not, then it's just not a good fit. Then we wouldn't come to an agreement. So with our partners, that's a critical part of what we do. We will sit down and not only talk about the vision for your business, but we'll also talk about the vision for your family. And why is your family on this earth? Like, what is it that your family does better than most families out there? And how can we use that to help other people and other families and those less fortunate?
I like that. And you're so right. Yeah. Why, it's better than calling like an investment firm or wealth management firm. It's initiate impact. And I think that's exactly what you guys are doing. You guys are initiating impact. Bob, it was a pleasure interviewing you and getting to know you. How can the listeners connect with you and learn more about you?
Yeah. Best place is to go to my website, bobdepasquale.com. All of my social links are there. So if you're looking to hook up on social, like you mentioned, my LinkedIn page, you can find me, the book, and everything is there. There's also initiateimpact.com, which is the name of my company if you're a generous family and you want to inquire about our services. So thank you so much for having me, man. It's really a pleasure. These type of conversations, I think, for business owners are so powerful because it lets them know that there's other people out there in a similar situation, right? I mean, we're all just trying to do good with what we have. So thanks so much for having me, man. And best of luck to everyone out there running a business.
Thanks, Bob. To learn more about what we do and how we can help you grow more wealth, please visit www.finassetprotection.com. That's FIN, assetprotection.com. The topics presented in this podcast are for general information only and not for the purposes of providing legal, accounting, or investment advice. On such matters, please consult a professional who knows your specific situation.